Welcome to Be Undaunted. This is the podcast that helps you lead stronger, elevate your impact, and live with more energy.
I'm George Dom, former Navy fighter pilot, Blue Angels flight leader, and corporate executive.
And I'm Tara Collingwood, performance dietitian to Olympians, CEOs, and everyday people that are just under pressure. If you're ready to grow, to strengthen your leadership, and to reclaim your energy.
If you want to feel more intentional, more capable, and yes, more undaunted, you're in the right place. Welcome to our third episode of Be Undaunted. Hey, Tara, how you doing?
I am great. I'm still on a high from episode 2 where we had our first guest and Ryan Stramrud, and he was absolutely amazing. So if you haven't listened to episode 2, definitely go back and listen to that.
Yeah, man, he was impressive, but in a very, common sense, down home way. I mean, he doesn't portray himself as anything other than one of us, who just happened to go out and do amazing things. I mean, I can't imagine what it was like to swim in Antarctica without a wetsuit. Oh my gosh. Unbelievable.
I can barely do 6 minutes in my cold plunge of 50 degrees. So done. All right. So what are we talking about today, George?
Well, I thought we'd discuss one of the most overused words in business and culture today, leadership. And of course, we could spend hours and hours and hours because there are thousands of books and endless talks. And yet, if you ask 10 people what leadership actually is, you're going to get 10 different answers. So instead of adding to the noise, I thought we would level set and start here by defining what we mean, what you and I mean by leadership. So, Tara, when you hear the word leadership, what strikes you? What comes to mind?
Well, it's funny because you and I brainstormed this and I said, I'm a little intimidated by the word leadership because you wrote this book, High Trust Leadership. And I'm like, you're the leadership guy. I'm not a leader. And you're like, what are you talking about? How can you say you're not a leader? And I'm like, well, to me, a leader is someone who leads a team of people and, all this stuff. So I think that is a really important distinction that a leader is not necessarily the CEO, the COO, the CFO, but it's a person who's leading their family called mom or dad. It's a person who is setting an example, who is a role model, it's not just someone who has to be in the business sense of being a leader.
Yeah, good point. And I think, fundamentally, if you want to be undaunted in your life, and dealing with uncertainty and change and challenges and setbacks, you have to be a leader. And we're going to get into that in more detail here in a minute because, I think part of the confusion is that we often blur the line between leadership and other things, authority or titles or the corner office, even get into personality. But for me, leadership really shows up. It's all about change, right? When there's uncertainty, when there's a crisis, when there's growth, when there's new ground to take. So if nothing needs to change, you don't need leadership. You need good management. And that matters. But management is about taking the status quo in the current situation and making it as efficient and productive and effective as possible. Leadership is about going someplace new, about taking new ground, about growing. And so when I was in the Navy and I commanded a squadron, people are always coming and going. Every month you'll have a half a dozen or more people depart and new people check in. We're constantly having turnover as people complete their tour of duty.
Right.
And so every month I'd meet with the new folks, and there were officers and senior enlisted and even brand new sailors. And I'd talk about the squadron's mission, about our values and its history. But then I'd always end with, I'd ask a simple question. Who in here is a leader? And of course, the officers would raise their hands, the chiefs and the first-class petty officers. but there was always a handful of brand new sailors sitting there with their hands down in their laps. And so I'd reach around and I'd pick one and I'd say, Airman Apprentice Smith, why didn't you raise your hand? You don't think you're a leader? And he'd usually...
Because that's not intimidating. When Commander George Dom calls you out and says, aren't you a leader?
Yeah.
What did he do?
The poor kid, he probably never talked to more than a lieutenant before, and now this old guy is picking on him. But they usually stammered and he'd say, oh, no, sir, I'm not a leader. I'm just a sailor. And then I'd say, listen, when I walked in here and I saw you sitting in the front row, paying attention, uniform squared away, shoes shined, you're sending me a message. You're sending me a message. Those details matter. And they were signals. They were signals of pride, discipline, dedication, and respect for the team. That's leadership, right? Because it's not about rank or job. It's about how your presence influences everyone around you.
Well, and that's it is, you're saying you're showing me, and he's thinking, what in the world could I possibly show you? But not only is showing you his, leader on paper, but I love how you say, you're leading, showing, the rest of your colleagues and people in your squadron that you mean business, that you are serious about this, that you're showing up in your best effort.
That's right. You're leading by personal example. And so leadership begins with leading the most difficult person to lead, of course, yourself.
Oh, get that mirror out.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I love this because you've really helped me to kind of open my eyes and maybe my insecurities of thinking that, I'm not a leader. And I love just this idea of how do you lead yourself? And are you genuine? Are you showing up as your best? Of course, none of us are perfect. None of us are going to be 100% all of the time. But when you can look in the mirror and say, you know what? Yeah, I am showing up and I am bringing my energy and my authority and my decisiveness and, some of these things that we think of when we think of a leader, then yeah, you're leading yourself. And then you can start thinking about who else am I being a role model to or potentially leading in my life.
That's right. And you're sending signals every day to everybody around you, but it starts with the individual and how you lead yourself. But then sooner or later, if you're doing it well, the circle's going to grow. It's going to get bigger. And if you think about it, nothing meaningful ever really is accomplished alone. There's an old saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far with significant achievement and lasting significance, you must go as a team. And that means, leading others. I mean, even in sports where they're individual performance, like in tennis or whatever, they all have a support team with them. They could never accomplish at a high level unless they were part of a team. And so that's what I think is really key. You got to go as a team.
Absolutely. You could call it an entourage in tennis.
That's
or
right.
you could call it a team. No, seriously. But yeah, I mean, no one, great. There's another saying, no one great ever did it by themselves, right?
That's right.
It's always the people that hold us up, that are working behind the scenes, who really, don't take some of the credit. And actually they're leaders too, who are behind the scenes and making all of the things work to create whatever product it is that the team is working on. So a lot of times, I think of that leader as, well, they're the big visionary and they're the one who, isn't necessarily the day-to-day operator. That's us little people. And this leader is this big visionary. So, help me to understand that, it doesn't have to be the CEO, the big visionary, but there's other things that really make a person a leader.
Right. And really, if you think about it, that, in this day and age, with things changing so rapidly and everybody emphasizing speed and velocity, if you had a big hierarchical structure where the leaders are the only ones at the top, then you're just going to be really slow and it's just not going to work anymore. Successful organizations, whether it's in business or sports or the military, high-performing teams have leaders at every level all the way down. You want to have people everywhere who understand what the vision is for where we're going to go. They have a clear idea of what their responsibility is, and literally they have their own vision for how they are going to perform and expand their influence and contribute to accomplishing the mission. And then they act in a way that develops a high level of trust so that the team is working well together. And then finally, in your wheelhouse, they show up every day with a high amount of energy, positive energy that allows them to play at a high level, regardless of adversity and so forth. So,
yeah. I've been on teams before where the leader is, I don't know if I want to say people are scared of the leader, but I think sometimes, they can be a leader can turn into sort of more of a dictator. And so what, in your experience working with teams, if a leader is more of that dictator, how does that trickle down? I mean, I've seen teams like just, nod their head, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, whatever. And, they're not challenging. They're not, because they're scared. So how does that impact the team when that happens?
If you have a dictator as a leader, right? In the Navy, as the CEO of the squadron, I could force compliance because I had the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and I could use the stick and I could drive compliance, but I would never get the enthusiastic commitment and passion and dedication that you really need to be successful. So I think the short answer to your question is, yeah, there's examples out there of dictators who have been successful with their teams, but I would submit that they never accomplish their full potential because the leader didn't have a relationship with the team where they were able to really unlock everything that they were capable of.
Well, and I think that goes to your point of trust, right? If your leader is a dictator, then you almost feel like, I don't trust this person. And maybe you're doing things behind their back. You're talking about them. You're trying to get away with things because you're afraid to get caught. Like, I can just see how this can work even in parenting. It's that fine line between, being that person of authority, but yet not being a dictator where you've got this team that's scared. And so, trust, like how do you work with teams to help, or how do you work with leaders to build that kind of high trust environment?
First of all, you have to be vulnerable. That's in its essence. That's what trust is a willingness to be vulnerable with your success, vulnerable with maybe your finances, depending upon the situation. But it's all about, I have to let go here in order to really, for us to be successful. So that's sort of at its essence. And then, there's some fundamentals. You got to live up to your commitments. You got to keep your promises. You got to walk your talk. To build trust with people, you got to be all in, and you got to, on the tough days, you got to show up, bringing your A game to be the best leader you can be. Because if you're just taking names or casting blame or keeping score, that's not going to help. What matters is that you show up and do everything you can to help the team succeed. And then the one that really, I think, leaders are missing these days, because we're all moving at Mach 2. And we all have these task lists that are that are a mile long, right?
Uh-huh.
Stephen Covey said it really well when he said that you can be efficient with things, but you can't be efficient with people. If you want to connect with your team, if you want your team to feel that, hey, the leader understands me, he understands or she understands my challenges, my hopes, my concerns, my best ideas, then you have to take time to connect with that person to the point that they believe that you understand them.
You're describing vulnerability, but you also have to be honest, because I have seen leaders who sort of try to connect with their or coaches, in my work, I work with a lot of athletes. So, coaches or other people on the team who try to connect by becoming vulnerable, but almost like stretching the truth a little bit around what they're vulnerable about. So I think that honesty is such a big part of that. Again, there's a fine line there between like coming from a place of, real connection versus, oh, I'm going to try to sit down and, let's talk about the game last night with my team to try to connect with them. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. It can't be performative. It has to be sincere. It has to be authentic. And, for really high-performing teams, it's beyond, and honesty has to be one of the standards of the team. You can't have people who are not being fully honest and transparent. But honesty is, Tara, I ask you a question, and you're an honest person, so you're going to tell me the truth as you understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But in high-performing teams, if you want to have real speed and agility, you got to go beyond just being honest. Because if I have to ask you for the truth, it's too late. We're moving too fast. What I need is that you bring me the truth when I need to hear it. And that's what I call that's candor, right? But here's the challenge. You authorize somebody to bring you the truth. You're going to get it once. And then depending upon how you react to the truth,
yes,
you may never get it again, right? So we as leaders, first of all, we have to welcome the truth however it shows up. And sometimes it shows up as a whisper, a look. Sometimes it shows up as a thunderclap. And, it's funny. Do you know, other than your spouse and your kids, who's the best person to bring you the truth?
Oh gosh, I would say my kids, because kids can be brutally honest,
They
but so
can
can
be.
spouses.
Of course.
I don't know who.
People that don't like you very much.
Oh,
because they don't care. They don't care how you feel about it, right? So they're going to bring you the truth, but they're going to wrap it up usually in a whole bunch of drama and emotion and so forth, and then they're going to stick it in your face. And we have to be wise enough to sort of unpack all of that and see, is there something in here that I need to take action on in order to, raise my game and so forth. And maybe not, but at least we have to be smart enough, because somewhere in there may be something that you got to act on. So yeah.
Ooh, I like
honesty
that.
and candor. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then you also mentioned energy, which, you and I talk a lot about with our clients and everybody. So when you think of energy from a leadership perspective, if you are just burnt out physically, when you're burnt out physically, then you also get burnt out emotionally, mentally, the apathy, I just don't really give to, what's, can come in. And of course, if you're a leader and you're showing that's not a good example for the team. So how do you talk to people about energy?
Yeah. Well, the Reader's Digest version is that energy is contagious, right?
Yeah.
And if you show up and you are everything that you just described, that's going to have a huge impact on the team. So you have to show up modeling. You have to show up with the presence and the energy that you want the team to have. And then you as the leader need to think about not only your own energy, but the energy of the team. Too often we get into crisis mode and we are just jamming, and then that becomes the new normal. And we never allow the team the chance to get some recovery. And they're going to get recovery. Most likely, they're just not going to perform as well, right? So you have to think about it individually for your own energy, how you're showing up. But then you also have to pay attention to the demands you're placing on your team. And as we talk about, energy has to oscillate, right? And so whenever you stress and you push people to meet a deadline, to deal with a crisis, then you need to be wise enough to give them a chance to get some recovery. And otherwise, you're right. You'll just burn them out and you get high turnover.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, it's high turnover. But I'm thinking of real world examples of this in email, right? We all know, like, sometimes I feel like when people ask me what I do for a living, I feel like just answering, I email. Because you could just spend your whole day on email, right? To me, this is an example of leading in the wrong way and or a clue that maybe your team is burnt out, is looking at the time that some of these emails are coming in, right? So if you're constantly emailing your team or your whoever, again, in your life, if you don't lead a quote unquote team, but if you're constantly sending out business related emails at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 3 a.m., whatever crazy time it is, and or your team is sending out, you're receiving emails at these crazy times, looking back and going, I know in today's world, like everybody has their times that they're at their best and maybe they flex hours and that kind of thing. But on a consistent basis, if you've got someone who's emailing in a span of 20 hours in a regular workday, that's a problem. And that to me is a clue of this burnout, maybe I'm pushing them too hard. You can look at when's the last time you took a vacation? When's the last time, you just took a mental health day? And encouraging that in a leadership perspective, or again, doing it yourself, saying, I'm just taking Friday off because I need a day. And I'm just telling you guys ahead of time that, I'm going to go and take a recovery day for myself. So I think that is leadership in a good way when it comes to managing our energy. I
agree 100%. And I look forward to, we're going to do a much deeper dive on all of this here in the weeks and months ahead. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we didn't even talk about, of course, nutrition and exercise and taking care of your body. We've said before, your body is business relevant. And if you're not taking care of yourself and your sleep and all of those things, then you're not going to be at your best and you're not going to be able to lead effectively either. So, we'll continue to harp on those messages. I don't know, maybe harp is a bad word. Encourage those messages as well.
Exactly. So I want people to also recognize this axiom, and this is about why trust is so important as a leader, is that, if leadership is inherently about change, movement, we're going someplace new, we're taking new ground, we're not staying here, right? Anytime that there's significant change, individually or in an organization, there's always anxiety. There's always concern, right? Can we do this? Do they really mean it this time? Or is this just another flavor of the month? The reality is that people don't follow plans or strategies or whatever when they're anxious. They follow people. They follow leaders. So leaders don't eliminate the anxiety and the fear. You can't. It's inherent. What they do is that they absorb it because they've invested in the relationships among their team, that the team, they sort of swallow hard, they suck air around their teeth, and they go, okay, I'm coming. And how many times have you been, on a team somewhere and you're just not sure how things are going to go, but you're surrounded by people that you trust and you trust the leader. And so therefore you say, okay, let's get after it. That's why trust is absolutely sort of a non-negotiable if you're going to be successful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, anxiety is a big part of our business world today, of not knowing when the next job cuts, reorgs, all of those things are going to be. I'm reminded every time you talk about change, I'm reminded of that book. I'm probably dating myself. Who moved my cheese? Who moved my cheese? It's like, I don't know, someone else is controlling where things are going. And so that brings anxiety for a lot of people. So I love that idea of, as a leader, you might also be anxious, and it's okay to show some of that vulnerability, but also having the confidence of leading this team forward in times of uncertainty, and, reassuring and letting them know that this is the direction we're going, and I want you on board with me, and this is how we're going to do it.
People have very, shall we say, finely tuned crap detectors.
Yes.
And when you stand up in front of them as a leader and you try to give them an air of complete certainty, but inside you're really not, they can see through that. And going back to vulnerability a bit, when you say to them, I mean, I remember when COVID hit and nobody knew what was going to happen next, and to pretend that you knew what was going on and what you were going to do, forget about it. So, you tell people, hey, I'm not sure what's going to happen here, but we're going to respond to this, and we're going to respond in accordance with our core values. And I'm confident that based on the team that we have, that we're going to get through this. Now we're going to take some punches, and we're going to do what we have to do so that the company survives and so forth. But we're going to do this together, and we're going to get through it. And people, they'll join up and come along, with that. So
yeah, that idea that I'm in it with you. So this isn't just happening to you, it's happening to me, it's happening to us, and we together will figure this out, as a company, as a family, as a, whatever unit it is. So yeah, I love that idea.
So this circles back to, your initial comment, and where I believe leadership really lives is that you can't lead anyone farther than you're willing or able to lead yourself. And this requires discipline. It requires emotional regulation, if you will, or emotional intelligence. It requires integrity under pressure. At some point when you're facing a crisis or a real tough situation, very often the leader faces that critical moment of truth where either he or she's going to put the team first or put themselves first. And the team is waiting to see which you decide. So integrity under pressure. And then, as we've just talked about, energy management, because leadership collapses when the inner life and the outer role don't match.
Yep.
Whenever you're not being congruent or coherent in how you're living and operating.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for this discussion on leadership, because it makes me feel better about thinking of who a leader is and some of the qualities of a leader, and how it really is in so many different aspects in our life. Again, not just that business team or squadron that you're leading, but it's really, having those different ways that you come across with people, with trustworthiness, with being genuine, and like you said, having that foresight to, I'm willing to go there. If I'm not willing to go there, how do I expect my team to go there? I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why leadership development isn't about learning this technique or these 5 things. You see stuff on YouTube or whatever. It's about becoming someone that others are willing to follow at its
right.
core, right? And that's a great place to pause, I think, because we've talked about everyone as a leader. And in future episodes, we're going to go deeper into what helps people become undaunted leaders, whether they're leading themselves, a team, or an entire organization. So when you think about this, Tara, what's a question or takeaway you hope listeners sit with after today?
Just the idea that being a leader is who you are at your core and being genuine in how you show up, because how you show up is how they're going to perceive and follow. So again, that idea of I'm not willing to go somewhere. If I'm not willing to go there, how do I expect my team to go there?
Yeah, excellent. I love that. That's being undaunted, because leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about becoming someone others are willing to follow when the answers aren't obvious.
Love that. All right. Perfect. Well, thanks for joining today. Of course, follow and subscribe for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you are listening right now.
Thanks for listening, and stay tuned. Next time, we're going to have a really amazing guest. So until then, be undaunted.
See you next time.